Welcome back. In this video I want to talk about the Gnostic roots of amillennialism. Amillennialism derives from Gnosticism, and I'm going to demonstrate that in this video with church history. And there's a lot of examples you could use, but in this video I'll use Tertullian to show you what I mean. First of all, Tertullian lived about AD 155 to 240. And he may have died a little earlier than this, but that's a pretty good guess there, 240. And this makes him a contemporary of Origen. He precedes Origen. Origen comes a little later, but there is a little overlap there. From the article on Tertullian at Wikipedia, they say the following: Tertullian, 155 to 240, was a prolific early Christian author from Carthage in the Roman province of Africa. He is the first Christian author to produce an extensive corpus of Latin Christian literature. He also was a notable early Christian apologist and a polemicist against heresy, including contemporary Christian Gnosticism. Tertullian has been called the father of Latin Christianity and the founder of Western theology. Though conservative, he did originate and advance new theology to the early church. He is perhaps the most famous for being the oldest extant Latin writer to use the term Trinity, and giving the oldest extant formulation of the Trinitarian terminology later adopted at the First Council of Nicaea. Other Latin formulations that first appear in his work are three persons, one substance. And they give the Latin and the Greek here. He wrote his Trinitarian formula after becoming a Montanist. However, unlike many church fathers, he was never recognized as a saint by the church, as several of his teachings on issues such as remarriage for widows and fleeing from persecution, both of which he condemned, contradicted the teachings of the church. What's interesting about Tertullian is he spent his life fighting against Marcion and the Gnostic heretics. It's unfortunate that just shortly after the time that Tertullian wrote this, that there was a spiritual renaissance taking place in which Origen was Christianizing the Gnostic eschatology a little further and now teaching it to the masses. It was becoming acceptable down there. Just imagine what he would have thought about this. You'll see what I mean. Let's get to the quote. Listen as I read and just think to yourself, who is it among us today who is teaching these heresies? We must, after all this, turn our attention to those scriptures also which forbid our belief in such a resurrection as is held by your animalists. For I will not call them spiritualists. That it is either to be assumed as taking place now, as soon as men come to the knowledge of the truth, or else that it is accomplished immediately after their departure from this life. Now, forasmuch as the seasons of our entire hope have been fixed in the Holy Scripture, and since we are not permitted to place the accomplishment thereof, as I apprehend, previous to Christ's coming, our prayers are directed towards the end of this world, to the passing away thereof at the great day of the Lord, of his wrath and vengeance, the last day, which is hidden from all, and known to none but the Father, although announced beforehand by signs and wonders, and the dissolution of the elements and the conflicts of nations. I would turn out the words of the prophets, if the Lord himself had said nothing, except that prophecies were the Lord's own word. But it is more to my purpose that he by his own mouth confirms their statement. Being questioned by his disciples when those things were to come to pass which he had just been uttering about the destruction of the temple, he discourses to them first of the order of the Jewish events until the overthrow of Jerusalem, and then of such as concerned all nations up to the very end of the world. For after he had declared that Jerusalem was to be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles should be fulfilled, meaning, of course, those which were to be chosen of God and gathered in with the remnant of Israel, he then goes on to proclaim against this world and dispensation, even as Joel had done, and Daniel and all the prophets with one consent, that there should be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars, distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. For, says he, the powers of heaven shall be shaken, and then shall they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds, with power and great glory. And when these things begin to come to pass, then look up and lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. He spake of its drawing nigh, not of its being present already, and of those things beginning to come to pass, not of their having happened, because when they have come to pass, then our redemption shall be at hand, which is said to be approaching up to that time, raising and exciting our minds to what is then the proximate harvest of our hope. He immediately annexes a parable of this in the trees which are tenderly sprouting into a flower stalk, and then developing the flower, which is the precursor of the fruit. So likewise ye, he adds, when ye shall see all these things come to pass, know ye that the kingdom of heaven is nigh at hand. Watch ye, therefore, and pray always, that ye may be accounted worthy to escape all those things, and to stand before the Son of Man, that is, no doubt, at the resurrection, after all these things have been previously transacted. Therefore, although there is a sprouting in the acknowledgement of all this mystery, yet it is only in the actual presence of the Lord that the flower is developed and the fruit born. Who is it then that has aroused the Lord now at God's right hand so unseasonably, and with such severity shake terribly, as Isaiah expresses it, that earth, which I suppose is as yet unshattered? Who has thus early put Christ's enemies beneath his feet, to use the language of David, making him more hurried than the Father, whilst every crowd in our popular assemblies is still with shouts consigning the Christians to the lions? Who has yet beheld Jesus descending from heaven in like manner as the apostles saw him ascend, according to the appointment of the two angels? Up to the present moment they have not, tribe by tribe, smitten their breasts, looking on him whom they pierced. No one has as yet fallen in with Elias. No one has as yet escaped from Antichrist. No one has as yet had to bewail the downfall of Babylon. And is there now anybody who has risen again except the heretic? He, of course, has already quitted the grave of his own corpse, although he is even now liable to fevers and ulcers. He, too, has already trodden down his enemies, although he has even now to struggle with the powers of the world. And as a matter of course, he is already a king, although he even now owes to Caesar the things which are Caesar's. That's Tertullian on the Resurrection of the Flesh, chapter 22. So there we have Tertullian condemning Gnosticism. I'm going to go through a quick breakdown again of what he has said. And I want you to think about this. Who is it among us today who is teaching these heresies? The answer is, it's amillennialists. Amillennialists are teaching these heresies today. Okay? Let's go through this and take a look at this. And I hope you find this troubling, because amillennialism is troubling. Who is it then that has aroused the Lord, now at God's right hand, so unseasonably? This is a reference to Psalm 110. The Gnostics are saying it's fulfilled. It's not. The present session in heaven is going on, but the Lord has yet to return and bring in the kingdom. Tertullian will bring this up again in point 3, and I'll refer to it again. And with such severity shake terribly, as Isaiah expresses it, that earth, which I suppose is as yet unshattered. What he's referring to here is the closing section of Isaiah chapter 2. Here, I'll put that up on the screen.
For the day of the Lord of hosts shall be upon every one that is proud and lofty, and upon every one that is lifted up, and he shall be brought low. And upon all the cedars of Lebanon that are high and lifted up, and upon all the oaks of Bashan, and upon all the high mountains, and upon all the hills that are lifted up, and upon every high tower, and upon every fenced wall, and upon all the ships of Tarshish, and upon all pleasant pictures. And the loftiness of man shall be bowed down, and the haughtiness of men shall be made low, and the Lord alone shall be exalted in that day. And the idols he shall utterly abolish, and they shall go into the holes of the rocks, and into the caves of the earth, for fear of the Lord, and for the glory of his majesty, when he ariseth to shake terribly the earth. In that day a man shall cast his idols of silver, and his idols of gold, which they made each one for himself to worship, to the moles and to the bats, to go into the clefts of the rocks, and into the tops of the ragged rocks, for fear of the Lord, and for the glory of his majesty, when he ariseth to shake terribly the earth. Cease ye from man, whose breath is in his nostrils, for wherein is he to be accounted of?
Okay, as you can see, that clearly has not been fulfilled, at least not in any real sense. To those of us that are down to earth, we know this hasn't been fulfilled. For those that think it's been fulfilled spiritually in the spirit realm,
Guess who?
well, that's just a bunch of silly nonsense. Who has thus early put Christ's enemies beneath his feet, to use the language of David, making him more hurried than the Father. Psalm 110. The Lord said unto my Lord, Sit thou at my right hand, until I make thine enemies a footstool for thy feet. The Lord remains in heaven until he's given the directive by the Father to come to earth and bring in the kingdom age. At that time, the enemies of the Lord will be made a footstool for his feet. These people that are more hurried than the Father suggest that the enemies are already made the footstool for Christ's feet, and this error is taught today by none other than our amillennial friends. Tertullian then adds this to his argument, making him more hurried than the Father, whilst every crowd in our popular assemblies is still with shouts consigning the Christians to the lions. Yeah, so much for that idea that Christ's enemies are subjected to him. Reality is against such a notion, and amillennialists need to keep that in mind. Every time they start talking about spiritual fulfillments, reality is opposed to it. Who has yet beheld Jesus descending from heaven in like manner as the apostles saw him ascend, according to the appointment of the two angels? That's a good question. Nobody. Christ hasn't returned yet. But the full preterists say that he has. You see how the full preterists are in violation of this and teaching Gnosticism? And really, full preterists, I mean, why don't we just call it consistent preterism? Because that's what it is. And maybe we should just call full preterism consistent amillennialism, because that's really what it is. We should call it original amillennialism, because it's closer to Gnosticism than the backpedaling, reworked view presented by Augustine hundreds of years after this. So, really, full preterism is closer to the original amillennialism than Augustine's idea. Up to the present moment, they have not, tribe by tribe, smitten their breasts, looking on him whom they pierced. This would be another one for full preterism. No one has as yet fallen in with Elias. This is a reference to Elijah. And in the book of Revelation, we see that Elijah and Moses will appear in the end times. And, Tertullian's basically saying, look, this hasn't occurred, okay? We all know it hasn't. This affects preterism and partial preterism here. No one has as yet escaped from Antichrist. That would impact full preterism and partial preterism. No one has as yet had to bewail the downfall of Babylon. Again, preterism refuted. And is there now anybody who has risen again except the heretic? Full preterism teaches we're already raised. The heretic's already quitted the grave of his own corpse, although he is even now liable to fevers and ulcers. That would be full preterism. Already trodden down his enemies, although he has even now to struggle with the powers of the world. This is all of amillennialism refuted by this one. And the heretics believe they are already a king, although he even now owes to Caesar the things which are Caesar's. Amillennialism flunks this test cold. Amillennialism is teaching heresy, my friends. It's called Gnosticism. It's not Christianity. It's a denial of the covenants and a denial that Jesus of Nazareth is the Jewish Messiah. And please visit my website, www.timothycochran.com. The address there on your screen. Also a link that you see up here in the top right corner. If you enjoyed this video, click the like button and share it with friends. And please do consider supporting me through Patreon or PayPal. I would really appreciate it. Please prayerfully consider it. Thanks.